I still can't get over that. That's such a banger.
It felt good when I made it. Admittedly,
Yes.
it felt like, hey, I'm doing pretty good with this. I'm not as much of a failure of graphic design as I thought. That's a better minor.
His new thing.
I could go back to school.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. We are recording this, of course, on a day of mourning, a day of infamy, a day of sadness. It's Bo's birthday. We mourn the loss of his 20s, but there they are. There it is. You're a young man yet.
That's right. That's what they tell me.
I think it's always funny is like when I was little, my parents used to tell me like you have to make friends with people your own age. And there's only about 8 months or so of the year where you and I are of our own age. And then you go ahead and you get older than me. And actually, in a lot of ways, you are a senior citizen compared to me. Like I don't get sick nearly as much as you do.
I can't wait for my little discounts, my early bird specials. I know Denny's got me covered.
There are many people who have a worse immune system than me, and then I met you.
There's me. The death throes of my 20s tried to prevent me from reaching 30. But luckily, after 2 rounds of antibiotics and almost every homeopathic remedy I could find, from putting onions in my socks to eating whole bulbs of garlic, I am alive. I am 6 feet above ground for now.
Well, that's good. That's good. We have a guest on the show this time, a friend of ours, an original friend of the show. Like we're going back 5 years here, and it's been basically 5 years since she's joined us. But just have to say, a massive fan, massive friend, and then too one of our earliest supporters in Jane Gulliford Lowes. So I'm going to bring Jane on so we can talk a little bit about minelaying and gardening and the RAF Bomber Command and their control of the sea and the air. But let's go ahead and pop Jane on. There we are.
Hi, guys. Great to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Welcome back. And when Dr. Robeson made that intro song for us, when he said top scholars on the show, Jane is one of them. So welcome aboard Homebrew for your, second time now.
Thanks so much, guys. I can't believe it's been like 5 years since I was last on the show. Those years have just gone by so fast. It's insane. And so much has happened since then. Well, to all of us, really. It's been insane. But all I can say is I wish I could still remember enough of my 20s to actually be able to mourn the end of them. But yeah, it's been a while, shall we say.
You're a young man yet, Bo. You have a long way to go.
That's true.
But if I know you, forgetfulness
I could say the same.
So, Jane, the last time we were on, you and I talked about Above Us the Stars, which was kind of your first foray into Second World War history, and you talked a little bit about connections with Bomber Command. And now here we are, another book, also on Bomber Command, and this is kind of based off of your graduate studies, right?
That's right, yeah. So when I wrote Above Us the Stars, which is basically the story of my great uncle's RAF Bomber Command crew, and their tour of operations between 1943 and 1944. When I was researching and writing that book, it made me realize just how little I actually knew about the Second World War and how so much of my knowledge had basically come from just watching old movies. I think a lot of people can say the same. And that's really what inspired me to undertake a master's degree in Second World War history at the University of Wolverhampton over here in the UK. And I just absolutely loved doing that. It was fantastic. Such a fascinating, in-depth study. We studied, all the sort of major campaigns. We studied the Holocaust. It was just right up my street. And as part of those studies, I decided to research for my thesis the subject of RAF Bomber Command's mine-laying operation. So this is laying mines at sea to target enemy shipping. And the reason I decided to research that was that when I was writing the first book, it was something which my uncle's crew did a great deal of. They did a lot of mine-laying operations. But I couldn't find any information anywhere about this type of work that Bomber Command did. And I knew it was quite a big part of Bomber Command's role. But there was just nothing anyway. So that really inspired me to dig into this deeper, for the purposes of my thesis, and that then has translated subsequently into a book.
So, Jane, when we typically think of bomber command, we typically don't think of aerial mine laying, right?
Yeah.
So, can you kind of explain to us, just in a brief way, first of all, how you came across, this invisible campaign, which I think is an excellent title for this, because I'm going to be honest, I knew very little about aerial mine laying from 1940 to 1945. So, can you tell our listeners a little bit about how you came, to tackle this topic?
Okay. So, as I've mentioned, when I was researching my uncle's story, I discovered in his logbook that he and his crew undertook a lot of mine laying operations, but there was just no information anywhere about this. So I decided to conduct some further research. What is mine laying? What is going on? Why are the RAF, why is Bomber Command being involved in operations at sea? Isn't that what the Royal Navy was for? So I discovered that a large part of what Bomber Command were actually doing right from the get-go, so right from April 1940, involved laying mines in enemy harbours, ports, rivers, estuaries, canals even, to try to target enemy shipping. And what they were doing was laying mines where the Royal Navy couldn't reach. So the Royal Navy can't just sail into enemy ports and harbours. It can't just sail up the Kaiser Wilhelm Canal in Germany, or the Kiel Canal. They can't just sail up the Danube and drop a few mines. So Bomber Command could reach places that the Navy couldn't. And plans had been put in place for this roundabout from about 1936 onwards. But the Germans actually stole a march, and they began mine laying around British ports and harbours as early as about October 1939. But British plans were in place. They just weren't as advanced at this stage. So the idea of mine laying, the purpose of it, is to try to disrupt your enemy's seaborne communications and logistics. What do we mean by a mine? Okay, now the idea that I had in mind, and I'm sure that lots of your listeners and viewers will have in mind too, is a big black spherical object that bobs around on the surface of the ocean, with the little pointy things coming out of it, that floats towards ships and puts them in peril. We've all seen the old black and white movies of downed airmen in dinghies fending off these things, with an oar. That is absolutely not what we're talking about here. Those are naval mines. What we are talking about is a really sophisticated piece of technology that was developed in the late 1930s to be specifically laid by bomber aircraft. So we're talking about, perfect picture, a long cylindrical container. Inside it's got arming mechanisms. Inside it's got fuses, and the little bit that you see on the end, that's actually a parachute. And the reason why it's got a parachute on it, because it's to slow its descent into the water. Why does that need to happen? Because if it hits the water at full tilt, the mechanisms inside are so delicate that they will break apart, and the mine won't function. So basically, we've got two types of mines that the RAF used here. You've got magnetic mines and acoustic mines. And these mines are designed to lay in fairly shallow waters, so seabeds around ports and harbours, riverbeds, that sort of things. A magnetic mine will be triggered by the passing overhead of a large metal object, i.e. a ship or a boat. An acoustic mine will be triggered by the noise of a ship's engines passing overhead. So these are really crafty sort of sly devices, and they can be just laid on the seabed. They can be there for months. They can be there for years before they're actually triggered. They've got, as the war progresses, they've got increasingly advanced technological capabilities. Sometimes the magnetic and acoustic mechanisms are combined. Sometimes they have timer switches on them so that ships can pass overhead 6 or 7 times and won't actually trigger them. It's only on the 7th or 8th operation that the mine will actually explode. Now, we're not talking about mines blowing up ships into 1,000 pieces here. There's no big explosion. There's no flames. There's nothing like that. What happens is the way that a mine works is that it will explode when triggered on the sea floor. And it's the pressure wave that it creates which hits the bow or the base of the ship and basically breaks the spine of the ship and breaks it too. And many a ship of all different kinds came to grief in that manner. So we're talking about the big sort of industrial barges that we used to transport German goods up and down the canals. We're talking about troop carriers. Mainly, we are talking about targeting merchant shipping because that's basically the heart of the enemy's supply chain. So we're looking at targeting merchant shipping coming down from Norway into Germany, carrying iron ore from Narvik. We're looking at troop carriers moving around the coast of northern Germany, around the coast of Denmark, and also into the Baltic Ocean when the Soviet Union is invaded in 1941. So much of the German logistics that we don't necessarily think about are actually moving by sea and by coast. Because remember, it's more dangerous for their vessels to be out further at sea, where they are prime targets for the biggest navy in the world at that point, the Royal Navy. So it makes more sense for them to try and hug the coastline, and that's what Bomber Command is targeting. And it's massively successful right from the get-go.
So I want to ask a little bit about the work that goes into not only the development of the mine, how this aerial dropped mine comes along, as you mentioned right there, just at the onset of the war. It's ready for the onset of the war. But then, there's got to be so much care and procedure that goes along. And of course, the aircraft have to be able and have to be capable of flying them, of dropping them. So it's not like you're going to have, say, a twin engine light bomber or a medium bomber. I mean, in this picture here, which, give credit to the Imperial War Museum for their incredible photographic collection, that's a B-24 Liberator. Some of the other pictures that we've seen are Halifaxes. These take massive aircraft to move. So could you tell us a little bit about the development, certainly, and the kind of the shaping of the strategy, and then a little bit about what goes into actually getting one of these ops off the ground, literally and figuratively?
Okay, so I think we have to go back to the end of the First World War, when aerial mining was first considered as a possibility. There were certainly discussions that it could be something which, had potential for any future conflicts. But it was in 1936 that Arthur Harris, of all people, actually sent a dispatch to the Royal Navy, to the Admiralty, saying, I think we need to think about this method of warfare. And he sort of come up with a vague idea of what he actually called the H-bomb, which is basically a specification for an air-laid mine. At the same time, the Admiralty were also having similar kind of thoughts as to, how aircraft could be used to better deliver mines. You would think, great, everyone's thinking along the same lines, everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet, but what this actually involved was a massive bust-up between the Admiralty and the RAF, because the Admiralty wanted to control it because they considered it to be a naval operation. RAF wanted to control it because they saw it as an aerial operation.
And there's never such a thing as inter-service rivalry, ever.
Well, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So this huge bust up between the two services, and eventually the politicians are called in about 1938 to try and get it resolved. And eventually they come to some sort of agreement that the Navy will actually develop the mines, and then there will be some experimental, some trials with RAF aircraft in early 39. But at this point in time, there aren't really the aircraft in existence to deliver these mines. It's all just kind of a theoretical possibility. Initially, it's considered that the Coastal Command boat aircraft will be used to deliver these, but they quickly found to be unsuitable. And then eventually it's established that the only aircraft which is going to be capable of delivering these mines when they come on stream in the beginning of April 1940 is actually the Handley Page Hampden light bomber, twin engines. So initially the Hampden is carrying out these operations, but it can only deliver one mine per operation, which is not a great use of resources. But as the war progresses, the campaign is considered to be of such importance that every bomber, which is subsequently developed by and for Bomber Command throughout the course of the Second World War, is adapted so that it can carry air-laid mines. So every kind of bomber that you can name, every kind of bomber that you can think of is adapted to undertake this kind of work. But also, and quite magnificently, I think, Coastal Command and Fleet Air Arms swordfish aircraft, the old string bag, the biplanes, they're actually delivering air-laid mines right up until about late 41, early 42 as well. And they can only take one as well. The idea is it doesn't take a lot of mines to cause the damage and the disruption that you need to achieve. It's all about the threat. It's all about causing massive disruption. So if your enemy knows that you've been dropping mines in a particular area, he doesn't know exactly where they are. So he then has to go and sweep the whole area with his minesweepers to try and find these mines. That then delays the sailing of his ships, delays the departure from base of his U-boats. So it's all about causing as much chaos and as much disruption to the enemy as is possible. And you only need a few aircraft laying a few mines to be able to do that. And it works brilliantly right from the get-go. So from April 1940, 13th of April 1940, Bomber Command start laying mines around the coast of Denmark, sort of between Denmark and Norway and down towards northern Germany, down towards Kiel Bay. If you look at a map, you can see there's lots of little narrow channels which ships are basically forced to pass through to get out up towards Norway and to get then out into the North Sea and the Atlantic. So this is perfect territory for mine laying because these ships have to pass through these very narrow channels. So all it takes is you know, a few mines laid within the first couple of weeks, and already we're seeing ships being sunk left, right, and centre. The ships going down all over the place, and the Germans are just absolutely clueless as to what's going on. Massive panic ensues. Now, we often hear about, and we often talk about the Allies' shipping convoy system, don't we? For the Battle of the Atlantic and the convoys up to Russia as well. But this action by Bomber Command actually forced the Germans to undertake their own convoy system as early as August 1941, because they were losing so many ships to air-laid mines. So they had to introduce a system whereby their own vessels, their own merchant convoys, were being escorted by naval ships and by minesweepers to clear the way through, because it was just so dangerous for them to traverse these coastal routes.
So, Jane, you mentioned someone a little bit earlier, Arthur Harris, Bomber Harris, right? There's a lot of myths and maybe a little bit of confusion around what Bomber Harris actually wants. Can you kind of dispel some of those myths that surround him in this, invisible campaign that we're talking about?
Yeah, certainly. So when Arthur Harris becomes the commander in chief of Bomber Command in early 1942, he is very, very keen to ensure that the mine-laying campaign is basically stepped up a gear. He's seen the potential right from the very, very start. It's his Hamdens from 5 Group who are carrying out the very early operations in April and May 1940. And he's seen how successful it is. So he wants to basically roll this out on a much bigger scale and get the other groups of Bomber Command involved in mine-laying operations. One of the myths which has arisen surrounding the mine-laying campaign is that Harris thinks it's a total waste of time. There are grumbles by Harris about the fact that he's having to do so much mine laying and do bombing at the same time as well. And I think that's been misinterpreted by the few historians who've looked at the topic over the years as saying that Harris was against mine laying. He's absolutely not. It's basically his baby and he wants to expand it massively. And it's Harris who comes up with this plan to make the best use of Bomber Command's resources by deciding that mine laying will take place in bad weather when it's too dangerous to carry out bombing. His mantra is bomb in good weather, lay mines in bad. So that means that Bomber Command's resources are being used sort of in a balanced way at all times, and that the mine laying campaign doesn't suffer, but the bomber campaign, more importantly, which of course is the raison d'etre of a Bomber Command, that doesn't suffer easily either. So basically, bombing is always going to take priority. That's why Bomber Command exists. But the way that the operations are organized by Harris is that mine laying runs alongside, sort of complementary to this. There are plenty of nights when bombing can't take place due to, cloud conditions or due to bad weather, and that's when the mine layers are sent out. It works perfectly.
So we're talking about the effect of it, and you're saying how it works so well. How are the German reaction? What are they doing to try and counter this? And can they even counter it? Because one thing that we know about the Kriegsmarine is that they've invested so much of their time and energy and effort into building these massive warships like Tirpitz, like Bismarck, and then all of a sudden they start to rely on mini subs by 1944 and 45. So what's the kind of the hang up for the Germans?
Okay, so what it means is that the Germans have basically got to divert a massive amount of resources away from existing Kriegsmarine activities and focus these on minesweeping. So the minesweeping forces expanded exponentially in sort of 43 into early 44. Massive numbers of men, material, raw materials, which could have been better used elsewhere, and now having to be used for minesweeping. And also you've got, not just at sea, you've also got resources being repurposed and diverted on the land as well, because you've got artillery, you've got anti-aircraft guns, which could be better used fending off bombers over Berlin or on the Eastern Front or wherever. They're now having to be diverted to German ports and harbours and all along the coastlines of occupied nations such as France, Holland, Denmark and Norway to try and ward off the mine layers. And that's something which I think doesn't really get considered at all when we're looking at the overall German response to Bomber Command.
When it comes to, and I was kind of looking at a few maps that have, sort of laid out, where Bomber Command is laying these mines. And I noticed, and you said a little bit earlier, that Bomber Command, is laying mines, around the Baltic Sea. There's a, very famous, nation state of Sweden who's, been traditionally neutral in a lot of, the Second World War campaigns. Does that affect sort of Sweden's neutrality at all?
Not especially. There are grumbles made by the Swedes, but you have to bear in mind that these mines are laid to extremely precise coordinates. The actual minefields themselves are very, very small. Such is the precision required in order to directly target the enemy shipping routes, that if a particular aircraft is unable to find its exact dropping zone, it will have to return home with its mines. It has to bring them back home again. Whereas, a bomber crew may just, drop their bombs on the nearest town that they can find, or just drop their bombs in the North Sea before they come back home again. Because these are such expensive and technical pieces of kit, the mines have to be brought back home again if the target area can't be found. So the risk to the Swedes is not great if provided the mines are laid with precision in the areas that they are supposed to be laid in. So we're talking very, very close to the Danish, German and Norwegian coasts here. We're not just talking about random spots of the Baltic Sea. It's very, very close. It's coastal.
Would you take us through and take the listeners through the kind of the basic operation, a day in the life or a night in the life of a mine layer? because I think so often, we watch like the American Army Air Forces stuff, like the Target for Today, and we get an idea of what an American bomber crew goes through for a daylight bombing mission, or you watch any of the the 617 Squadron movies, or any of those things that kind of give you an idea of what bomber crews flying on bomber missions do. But what does a bomber crew on a mine laying mission? How is their life, their approach to the mission, their flight any different?
Okay, it's not actually that much different to the work that an ordinary bomber crew will be carrying out. And what you have to bear in mind is that there are no specialist mine laying crews. So these are just ordinary bomber crews who will be doing a handful of mine laying operations as part of their operational tour. So their main job is going to be bombing. The actual training that they receive for mine laying is virtually non-existent. It's basically just fly out to your target, drop your mines at the allotted coordinates and fly home again. But that's basically it. So their day, their preparation isn't going to be greatly different from anyone preparing for an ordinary bombing operation. So they would still be during the day flying out on exercises or working up other aircraft, attending training sessions, attending lectures. But then they would attend their briefing on an evening exactly the same way as if they were going ahead on a bombing operation, where their target and the coordinates will be revealed. They will then be issued with their maps, and the navigator will go ahead and plot his course. But in the meantime, the ground crews are doing their work. Now, the main difference with regard to bombs and air-laid mines is that a representative of the Royal Navy would often be on hand to arm the mines before they are actually loaded onto the aircraft. And the reason for that is that the Royal Navy build and construct these mines for the RAF to deliver. So it's very much a joint effort. Now, you remember how I said how much they were arguing in the late 1930s, how there was this massive bust-up between RAF Bomber Command and the Admiralty. By this point in the war, once the operations actually get underway, they work together absolutely beautifully, to the extent that a specialist Royal Navy team is actually co-opted into Bomber Command headquarters specifically for this purpose, to advise on the mine laying operations, and it all works together beautifully. So the cooperation is perfect. It's a perfect example of a combined operation and how it should be run. And that's right from 1940 right through to 1945. But getting back to our particular crew, so once they've got their coordinates, they've got their maps sorted, etc., their aircraft would have been fitted with its mines. Initially, as we've said, we've got one mine per aircraft, but when the heavy bombers come on stream, the Halifaxes and the Lancasters, they take 4. Likewise, Sterlings. Then towards sort of 44, 45, the Lancasters are taking up to 6 of these mines. So massive amounts are being dropped. Harris's target of trying to lay 1,000 mines per month is met with regularity. I mean, that's a massive amount. When you think of the number of aircraft involved, if they're only dropping 4 each, that's a lot of aircraft. That's a lot of operations. So our typical crew would fly out, follow their coordinates. It would really, their sort of the conduct of their operation would really depend on what their target area is. If they are flying to what we call the western mine laying areas, the Western Gardens, and I'll explain the terminology in a moment as well. Perhaps we should have done that at the beginning. So they are flying to the French Atlantic coast, and they are typically targeting U-boat bases in places like Brest, La Rochelle, Bordeaux. They are dropping their mines right in the lanes outside the entrance to these U-boat bases. But what their advantage is that they are actually flying through the Bay of Biscay. They are not actually flying over enemy territory to get there. So to some extent, that is a slightly easier job than the guys who are having to fly to Kiel Bay or to Danzig over into the Baltic waters, because they are flying over probably Holland, probably northern Germany or southern Denmark, and they are obviously subject to attacks by night fighters and anti-aircraft fire for the whole of that portion of their journey. And remember, as I've mentioned, these crews are laying very, very close to enemy ports and harbours. So they are well within range of enemy anti-aircraft fire, and it is incredibly dangerous for them. And the second factor to take into account, as I've mentioned, Harris's policy of bombing good weather, mining bad. One of their main enemies is bad weather, particularly in winter. All of these operations take place at night. The vast majority are taking place in really, really appalling conditions when icing is a problem. In the early days, navigation systems aren't so great, and they are relying a lot on dead reckoning and to try and work out where they are, to calculate the correct dropping zone for their mines. So there are so many different hazards that these crews face, which just hasn't really been recognised. Because typically, mine laying has often been dismissed and considered as an easy operation for crews to undertake, and it was traditionally recognised as an operation that new crews coming into a squadron would be given to undertake, just for them to get the feel of the aircraft, to get the feel of undertaking an operation. But in reality, that policy of giving new crews an initial mine laying operation to carry out waxed and waned as the war went on, and it really was entirely dependent on operational requirements. For example, one of the squadrons that I've looked at in great detail, 10 Squadron, in 1943 they had over 100 new crews join the squadron, and of those crews, only one was afforded the opportunity to undertake a mine laying operation as their first operation. So there was very much a trial and error as the campaign progressed. From operations in 1942, the mine layers were beginning to suffer very, very heavy losses. And so Harris commissioned a report from the operational research section as to why this was happening. Why were there so many losses being encountered? And it was discovered that it was a combination of various different factors, but the main reason was inexperienced crews being sent to mine areas in the east, in the Baltic, around Denmark, around Kiel Bay, etc., where there was very, very heavy anti-aircraft fire, where there was heavy chance of being disrupted by night fighters, etc., and they didn't have the experience to cope with this, and so they were just being picked off quite easily because they weren't experienced crews. Whereas if you've got a crew who've undertaken 15 bomber operations, they know how to avoid enemy night fighters. They know the areas that you need to avoid. They know how to try and get out of a searchlight by corkscrewing or whatever. But the rookie crews don't have this experience. So the policy was developed as the war went on that rookie crews, less experienced crews, would be sent to the French Atlantic coast where the hazards were less, and the more experienced crews would take on the eastern mine laying areas because they'd be more likely to be able to get out of trouble.
I'm kind of interested here because, every now and then in 21st century media, we find some, poor SOB, some poor bastard who, came across some piece of unexploded ordnance from the Second World War. Is the Royal Navy still dealing with some of the remnants of these, aerial dropped sea mines? Is that still kind of an issue?
Oh, God, yes. They're everywhere, particularly around the coast of Holland, Denmark. They're regularly fishing them out of the Oslo Fjord in Norway. The Baltic is a massive problem. The NATO actually have a sort of a standing group of a team of minesweepers from different countries, specifically tasked with clearing what's called legacy mines. So these are all sorts of, the Russians were obviously laying mines as well, mainly naval mines. So the whole of the Baltic area in particular is absolutely littered with these things. And, every now and again, you'll see on the news that, them being blown up to try and render them safe. But yeah, because they are just lurking there on the bottom of the seabed, they will be covered by silt, they'll be covered by debris. Many of them will have broken down by now, but there's always the risk that, that they're still there. And, they still potentially do pose a hazard. And it's a massive problem still.
It's amazing.
Yeah, I know we said we would say, a little bit about the term gardening and gardens,
yes,
because it's right there in the title of your book. We probably should have done this in the beginning, but what are the gardens?
Okay, so when the RAF was about to commence its Minelaying campaign in early 1940, some bright spark at the Air Ministry came up with the suggestion that actually we can't call these things mines and we can't call them minefields, because the Germans may pick this up on, on their code breaking, etc., on their chatter when they're intercepting signals, and they're going to know straight away what we're doing. So in typically British fashion, somebody came up with the idea of calling minefields gardens. And each particular minefield was given a horticultural designation. So you have things like daffodils, geraniums, nasturtiums, onions, and the mines themselves were given the name of vegetables. So in the code message and the orders that you read, a particular squadron might be given an order to please lay 15 artichokes in daffodils and forget-me-nots by, 500 hours or whatever. And the Germans will be looking at that going, what the hell? What does this mean? It's gobbledygook. So it's such a sort of a gentle and innocent description of something which caused absolute havoc and a great deal of death and destruction ultimately.
Yeah, Jane, it's obviously a little bit more difficult to actually tally, sort of really mark down the effectiveness of the mine laying campaign. Because like you said, there could be an aerial laid mine, that's, dropped in August, and it may not, detonate. It may not hit its target, until, September, October, November, so how exactly are we tracking the effectiveness of this campaign?
So this is one of the main problems which the RAF and the Air Ministry encountered in the very early stages of the war. How do you actually determine whether a vessel which has been sunk by an air-laid mine or by other means? So eventually they came up with a policy that they would look to see when a ship had gone down, was there any other reason for that ship being sunk? So was there particularly bad weather? Were there any Royal Naval submarines operating in the vicinity? Was the ship just wrecked? Did it just run aground? If there was no other explanation, and if the ship was sunk or known to have gone down in an area where mines had been laid, it was taken that the cause of the loss of that ship would be from an air-laid mine. And that's how they worked it out. The ones that were closer to shore, there was intelligence coming in from the Swedes and from Norway and Denmark, etc. It's pretty much easy to tell. But yeah, because of that, the figures are kind of quite wide-ranging. So the minimum figures range from around about 638 vessels sunk up to about 864. So we're talking about huge numbers of vessels, of enemy vessels being sunk here.
Yeah,
I tend to go for a figure somewhere in the middle, around about, say, 750 mark, I think is probably a fair assessment. So yeah, we are talking about huge numbers. And Bomber Command just never get the credit for this. People just assume, oh, ship's been sunk, must be the Navy, whatever. And that's absolutely not the case.
The thing that always strikes me about the Allied war effort, and we see this with American airmen, we see it with British airmen, is the total level of warfare. That's why I'm such a big fan of Philip Payson's O'Brien's book, How the War Was Won.
Yeah, one of my favorites too. Yeah,
just all credit to the air and to the Navy. And it's controversial because the first sentence is there's no decisive land battles of World War II, but it's a great book and highly on the recommended list for homebrew listeners. But it's the diversion of resources for the Germans and for this crushing and destroyed and crippling Nazi war machine. It falls apart because, all right, so you don't have enough sailors in the Kriegsmarine to crew U-boats and to crew battleships because you're putting men on minesweepers and you're sending them out to sweep the mines that Bomber Command can drop by night when it's raining over in 10 tenths cloud over Europe. They can just drop mines instead, and then the next day they'll be flying back over and they'll be bombing. So it's it's so endlessly fascinating and such a, it's easy to point out like, oh, maybe the Germans should have never started the war, but they definitely should have given up by like 1941, 1942, because everything is just seemingly falling apart for them. And there's this constant, it's the push and pull, and the Allies are very capable of doing both push and pull, while the German war machine is just absolutely crippled.
Floundering.
Well, the thing with Minelaying is it just segs together so beautifully with the bombing campaign. Look at it as an attack on transport networks, which is effectively what it is, but it's the transport networks at sea, on rivers, and in canals, and that just melds perfectly with the attacks that Bomber Command are raining down on railway hubs, on road networks, etc. So it's the whole thing. Just it's a bigger picture thing. I think we have such a tendency to sort of view particular campaigns or particular battles in isolation, and you really can't do that. It's very much a bigger picture thing. I mean, this has an impact on the U-boats. It has an impact on logistics. It has an impact on supply. It's just this network and this web which is gradually just totally blanketing the Third Reich, really. And yeah, it's fair to say that the Germans are onto a loser from pretty much 1941 onwards, I would say.
Bo,
I was going to say we do have a great segment on this show that covers myths, or as I've come to call it, boohickey, something that we get wrong, something that people completely take out of context, or anything of that regard. And it seems that already, because like you said, not a lot of people have written about this invisible campaign. What is a huge boohickey myth of Bomber Command's invisible campaign in the aerial mine laying? Something you want to dispel right now?
Okay, right now, I want to dispel the myth that mine laying was an easy option for the crews. It absolutely was not, for the reasons that I've already identified. But when you look at the loss rates and compare them to the loss rates on standard bombing operations, they are actually about the same. It's around about 3-4%.
Wow.
So there's very little difference in terms of the actual loss rates. This was a dangerous operation. You've got the weather against you, you've got anti-aircraft fire against you, and you've got German night fighters against you. It's there's very little difference to a bombing operation if you are having to fly over enemy territory to deliver your mines to a port or harbour in occupied territory. Very little difference, and the losses are the same. I mean, I think something in the region of about 487 bomber aircraft were lost on mine laying operations, which is a lot, and you're talking about in the region of about 2,500 to 3,000 men are lost just doing mine laying operations, which is not an insignificant number, but they've just been forgotten.
So we do have a member question, which kind of touches a little bit on what we've sort of just talked about here. This one comes on our Buy Me a Coffee page. And remember, dear listener, if you want to have your questions out on air and you want to take part in some exclusive bonus chats, all that other fun stuff and live streams and all this other things we do in our free time, you need to go and join us on the Buy Me a Coffee, and you can find the link in the description. But this question comes to us from Dan Mad Morgan, who asked us to ask you about veteran testimony and why veterans tend not to talk about gardening unless they are specifically asked.
Yes, I know Dan very well indeed. He actually helped me with his book as well. I think it's because it was considered to be very much an unglamorous job, or almost like a routine job. When historians typically have interviewed veterans over the years about their Bomber Command experiences, they want to know about the raids on Berlin. They want to know what it's like, being chased by a night fighter over Duisburg or Bremen. They don't want to know what it's like dropping a mine with a splash in the darkness that you don't actually see, with no result, until 6 months later, maybe, if you're lucky. It's just not a glamorous a glamorous topic. People just aren't interested in it. And I think because of that, many veterans have sort of thought, oh, well, no one wants to hear about this. It's not important. You know, I don't need to talk about this. And it's almost as if it's kind of like almost a bit of an embarrassment, because people considered it to be the easy option. So, you know, why would veterans be encouraged to talk about that? They're encouraged to talk about, you know, the old guns blazing, the massive explosions, you know, the blowing up the factories in Essen or whatever. And I also think that it's part of the whole way that Bomber Command veterans were perhaps dealt with and considered, or developed this idea of the work that they did was shameful, sort of after the war. And it's all tied in with the whole sort of Harris post-war legacy, if you like, and the way that, you know, Harris became persona non grata after the war, how Churchill sought to distance himself from the work of Bomber Command. Minelaying was considered very much a success at the time, but it was a Harris success. Therefore, nobody really wanted to know about it, because nobody wanted to be, you know, associated with it really. And I think that the veteran testimony has very much suffered because of that. Basically, it doesn't appear in the historiography. It doesn't appear in many veteran accounts because they weren't asked about it. And that's the fault of the historians, not the veterans themselves.
Mm-hmm. That's a great, what a way to tackle historical memory and historiography, and the wealth of information that's out there, or then when you find something obscure or a mission that is underwritten or unstudied, just the absolute, you know, just total bankruptcy of any primary sources. Bo, we have a little segment here that we should do. It's part of the name. Now, Jane, last time you were on, we had a nice long discussion about what's in our cup and what's not in our cup. So what is in your cup?
In my cup tonight, gentlemen, I have decaffeinated coffee. Not very exciting. Yeah. So don't drink booze at all. Haven't done for years. And now I'm sadly having to give up the caffeine as well. But in my defense, I was on about 8 or 9 cups of caffeine a day. So yeah, it was time to kind of knock it on the head.
Yeah. Bo, how about yourself?
So
you're sipping on something.
Funnily enough, I made the joke in class yesterday. I said, you know, tomorrow, meaning today, I'm scared. I'm scared that 30 is going to hurt. The death throes of my 20s that tried to kill me with illness X. And I said, well, in case anybody cares, I like rum. And I said it jokingly. And then about, 3 hours later, one of my non-traditional students, who is 21 and older, went and bought me something. It is absolutely an incredible bottle here. It is a product of Panama. It is bamboo rum. And I mean, he's trying to get an A in this class, and that's a great way to do it. And I'll say this: I don't know if you heard that or not, but I'll say this: X marks the spot, and I'm no pirate, but I will drink rum. So that is what is in my cup.
Well,
I'm quite jealous. I used to love rum. Oh, yeah. Man. Certainly beats decaffeinated coffee, that's for sure.
Well, much like our guest here, I've also given up booze. So I am having a nice mug of tea. But conveniently, I left it on the other side of the room. So I just kind of had to raw dog this episode with nothing to drink. So if my voice sounds worse now you know why.
Now you know why.
Homebrew History is brought to you by Civil War Trails, the world's largest outdoor museum. Get out there, make some history of your own. Follow and hike the trails of Civil War armies across Virginia, Tennessee, North Carolina, even up to Maryland and Pennsylvania. And when you're out there, make sure you grab a selfie with one of those signs. Use the hashtag #SignSelfie and let everybody know that you're enjoying Civil War Trails. Another thing that you can do, you can go ahead and follow us over to Buy Me a Coffee. And while you're there, you may as well go ahead and click the other link to go and visit our friend, the Bearded Historian, over on his Etsy page. Jeff Williams is making all kinds of great designs, and he's even running a promotional sale right now on all kinds of great merchandise that he's put out there. So be sure to go and check out what Jeff has for you. And since we're all here, Jane, the book comes out end of the month, right? End of March.
It's kind of right now. I actually took delivery of my copies today, and I know it's beautiful. I know I'm biased, but yeah, it is beautiful.
It means just
but it's actually out
art.
officially. The whole thing is just gorgeous. Yeah, the book is out around about 20th of March, but you can pre-order now.
You say today's a good day to get it.
Today is a good day to get the book. If you're watching or you're listening, check out The Invisible Campaign, Bomber Command Operations 1940-1945 by our friend Jane Gulliford Lowes. Bo, Jane, it's been a pleasure. It's been a delight. On behalf of Homebrew History, thank you all for listening and watching, and we will catch you next time.
Cheers, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.